ჩაწოდება ახლა ერთი საჭიროა. გარყა! არის! არის! გაუტაცა! არის! არის!
Hello, and welcome to the very first edition of the Football Talent Show. I'll be your host, Adam, and joining me as always is the one and only Jacek Kulig. Most of you will of course know Jacek from his Twitter account, Football Talent Scout, maybe from his website, where daily reports are made and the best scouting content around is created. But now he's joining the audio scene with a podcast. We're really happy to finally get this off and running. So Jacek, maybe you can give a few words about your journey up to this point and why it's the right time to make some new football content.
Hi Adam, great to be here. I am Jacek Kulig, also known as Football Talent Scout, with over 500,000 followers across all social media platforms and over 1,000 reports on footballtalentscout.net.
Yeah, Jacek, it's great to see the growth of Football Talent Scout, starting with one Ricardo Rodriguez report many years ago to now having all the biggest talents who have come through and still to come through in the future. As of course it is the Football Talent Show, we're going to be not necessarily talking about the biggest topics, the mainstream media and all the weekend's coverage, but going into some more unique themes. So maybe you can touch on what the listeners have in front of them for this afternoon's episode and for the future.
In this podcast, we won't be touching the mainstream very often. We will try to shine a light on underrepresented nations or the storylines not circulating in the media. We'll try to focus on talent production processes, the unique football landscape and the rising stars, lost wonder kids, and scouting in general.
And it feels like no better place to start than with a special country by the name of Georgia. They were, of course, the darlings of the European Championships, going in as rookie underdogs who had never been in the competition before, to eventually make it out of the group stage and even go 1-0 ahead against eventual winner Spain.
Yeah, and I must say that I'm slightly older than Adam, so I still remember the great generation of Georgian football in the 90s. So the Aveladze brothers, Kimpladze, Demetradze, Temur Kecbaya, so great footballers. Then we had this generation that I like to call the lost wonder kids generation with Jano Ananidze and Levan Kenya, maybe even Georgi Arabidze, although he's slightly younger than them. And yeah, we come to this current generation, so the truly golden one with Mikha Gabacheva, Kvaratskhelia, Mamardashvili, so the generation that took our hearts at the Euros.
Absolutely. And me and Jacek, of course, pride ourselves on our football knowledge, but it's always good to have a special guest with us to go over these big topics. And I think there's no one better we could have on for this very first episode for Georgia than the great Mikha Gabacheva.
Hello guys, hello. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me. It's a real pleasure and honor to be invited as the very first guest on your podcast. And yeah, as you mentioned, Adam, some of the things that we will be discussing today are not really covered by the mainstream media. And I'm really happy to hear that you guys are interested in that, because some of the things are really related to the development of Georgian football and some of the non-football things as well. So I'm really happy to be discussing all this today.
Yeah, and I think before we kind of get into these big topics, I would say, why don't we give a little bit of a deeper introduction into who you are, right? I think from everybody, they can tell with a name like Mikha Gabacheva that you are, of course, Georgian. So I think that's ticked. But maybe your football background, just for a second, for some of the people who may not be familiar with you.
Yeah, well, so I'm 24 years old. I started scouting, let's say, on a professional level in a professional football club just a couple of years ago. My first professional experience, I would say, was at Dinamo Tbilisi. Before then, I studied sports management in Barcelona, and alongside my bachelor's degree, I did several scouting courses, analysis courses, data analytics, some coaching stuff as well, several internships, and mostly scouting internships at different football clubs such as Villarreal, Odense as well. And after all this, in September of 2022, I started scouting for my local club, Dinamo Tbilisi, which is by far the biggest club in Georgia. And that was my first ever experience as a professional scout, let's say. Basically, a year after that, I found myself at Ghent, and I was mostly covering the eastern part of Europe as well as central areas of Europe. I still work at Ghent, and now I cover different leagues, not those ones that I was covering a year ago. But yeah, it's fun. It's quite entertaining because you watch different football from different continents, and that's all I ever wanted to do, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the dream job, right? Still
Exactly.
living remotely, but being able to watch football from all across the globe. One day you're in Korea, the next day you're in Uruguay, all through kind of the power of Y-Scout and the internet. So yeah, pretty cool stuff there. And then I guess on a more personal note, we always want to ask kind of one guest the same question, just to get to know them a little bit more from their background. And I always think a good one is the first football match you can remember watching. So it doesn't necessarily need to be the first football match you attended, but just kind of the first one that you maybe have a hazy memory of.
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably the very first one was the 2008 Champions League semi-final, Manchester United against Barcelona. Man United won that game 1-0 with the incredible Paul Scholes volley. Back then I was just 8 years old, and basically all this social media and all that stuff was not as developed back then. And I was not an active football fan because actually, strangely enough, no one from my family, not a single person, was a football fan. And no one ever liked football from my family, so I was not as actively involved in football because, for example, my father was not watching football on the weekend and I was just not sitting beside him watching football with him. I just fell in love with football just on that very day in 2008. And it was not until I was 11 or 12 when I actually found out and learned how to search some things on Google and how to find games and the schedule and how to change the TV channel to find the game that I want to watch. And yeah, I mean, since then, since I was 11 or 12, I started watching football every single weekend, and even up until today, that never stopped. And I guess it will continue until I'm alive.
And Mika, and can you tell us your first Georgian moment? So the first time that you watched a game in Georgia or Georgia national team?
I don't actually remember which one of them it was, but I'm pretty sure it was the national team game. I was at the stadium, but back then, the thing that I remember is that the stadium was not full, and that's very important to understand because nowadays, whenever the tickets go on sale, they are basically sold out within an hour. But back then, you could have bought a ticket just 5 minutes before the kickoff, and the stadium was still half empty. So one of my very first memories of watching football at the stadium, like live, was exactly that, watching the Georgian national team at the half-empty stadium. The place was quiet, nothing special. I think most probably we lost the game because back then we were losing every single game. To be honest, my first memory of watching and like attending a football game is not as good as watching football on TV.
I obviously have the background from America, so I think I can almost share in that a bit. That for me, football was something that was really only relegated to the television for the largest part of my life, and only recently, with kind of the MLS developing, but then also moving to Europe myself, is something that you also actually attend live and have a real fan culture behind. So yeah, that shares some similarities of what I've been through as well.
The thing is that even back then, Georgian football, especially on the club level, had a very negative media coverage. So as a kid, when you hear all those negative things about Georgian national team, Georgian club football, you never want to attend football games, and that was one of the reasons why when we were growing up, my generation and even younger kids, especially younger kids, they actually never attended Dinamo's games, or we never actually watched Georgian football as actively as we would watch, for example, the Premier League or La Liga or Bundesliga, which is terrible if you ask me, because well, you cannot develop football if no one is interested.
That's very true, and this is what we see, for example, in the Baltics, right? People are not really interested in football, and the general kind of football is suffering from that. So, and I think, Mika, you were in the wrong period because you were in between the two really great generations of Georgian football. So, the one with Arveladze brothers, Kobiashvili, Yashvili, Kaladze, Demetradze, Kinkladze, and then there was a break, let's say, for wasted talents like Kenya and Ananidze. And now again we have Georgian football in the best state possible. So it was really a difficult period. I remember that period for Georgian football, and you guys weren't considered strong, to say the least.
I think we'll get into basically all of those talents that Jacek just mentioned there. But I think one thing we want to always do here before diving purely into the football is also to explore a little bit more about the country. So to kind of almost provide a deeper insight into some of the football concepts, we always want to take one big theme out of each country and discuss them beforehand. And in regards to Georgia, I think it's impossible to look past the nation's struggles for independence and its really complex relationship with Russia in the past. I mean, aside from a really brief period of sovereignty from 1918 to 1921, Georgia was largely under Russian or Soviet control from 1801 until the Soviet collapse in 1991. And even since regaining independence, Georgia has really navigated, a difficult path as a sovereign nation. You know, there's always kind of that overarching fear, I would say, of Russia returning to kind of a really exterior prominence, and kind of this tension between kind of Russia to the north, and then, of course, the demands to integrate with the European Union. So how do you think this kind of has shaped Georgian culture in general? And then also, of course, we're still a football podcast here. So how do you think this has really influenced also the talent production and Georgia's football history as well?
Yeah, that's a great point. Very interesting, because I think it might be an overlooked topic, because some people might think that it doesn't have anything to do with football, especially football, but it actually has. And well, first of all, I would say that even before Russia, we had enemies since the very first day that Georgia was established as a nation. Around us, we had only huge Muslim empires, and they were always trying to invade us, and they did every now and then. However, the thing that developed within the nation throughout all the centuries was the fighting spirit and the ability to never give up and to fight for the freedom. And you can definitely see that fighting spirit has maintained throughout all the centuries, and even nowadays in the 21st century, Georgian people and Georgian football players have that. I've spoken to a few Spanish and Italian scouts, especially those, because culturally we are similar, like southern countries, emotional people, family oriented, so we are very similar. But one of the things that this nations love about Georgian players is exactly that, the fact that Georgian players basically will go through a brick wall for you. They will fight for every inch of the grass on the pitch, and basically because of that fighting spirit that we have. And that history and that traditions basically shaped this sort of character and Georgian people and Georgian players. But well, most recently with Russia, one of the downsides of Russian influence was that, as Jacek, for example, a few minutes ago mentioned, was that a lot of the Georgian players went to play in Russia, and I think because of that, they never actually reached the potential that they had. The thing that happened was that after the USSR, Georgia basically was in a terrible economic state. And because of that, a lot of the players still went to Russia because they just couldn't turn down the financial offer that they had from those clubs, because they had to basically find some alternatives to provide for their families and to basically sustain the family. So that was, in most cases, the only possibility for them. Some people might think that this sort of international scouting and video scouting and Y-Scout existed forever, but it actually didn't. It's a relatively new thing to scout all over the planet from one place. So back then, just a couple of decades ago, Georgian players didn't have as much exposure as they have today. And basically, when the Russian club would show up and offer you such a great salary, you just couldn't turn down, because you knew that most probably other European clubs wouldn't even be aware of you. So that's why the only option that they would have was to go to Russia. But nowadays it's changing, because players started to understand that Russia is not the only solution and not the only option, certainly, that they have. And you can definitely see the tendency that Georgian players are already not only leaving Russia, but not even going there. So that's the tendency that I'm happy to see.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you say also reminds me, almost just from you talking through, what kind of a lot of players in East Germany also went through in the 80s, where, you know, you didn't necessarily have the options in the West because of communist influence, and then pretty much your only path forwards in football was to either try and basically escape on a European Cup match in wherever that may be, or go to Russia, because it was kind of the only lucrative league where you could go. And it was a little bit of a, yeah, I would say, kind of caught between two bad fences, right? On the one hand, you can either stay at home in East Germany, which isn't so great in and of itself, but at least kind of keep your dignity for some, or you at least provide for your family in kind of an economic region where there's just no way to make money. And then you have an opportunity to, okay, it's kind of basically funding communism and Russian influence, but at least you're able to provide for your family. And I think those are kind of the same themes you're retelling here in Georgian context.
And the same thing happened in Poland, for example. So even after the Soviet Union collapsed, the 90s were very difficult in Poland as well. So the transition, not only in football, but for the society was extremely difficult to change from this communist system to the capitalism. It wasn't easy. So I think there are a lot of similarities between Poland and Georgia. And I think we always had very good relations with Georgia. So that's also also a great thing.
If we now go back to kind of the pre-fall of USSR, I would say this would be kind of the defining moment would be the Dinamo Tbilisi 1981 Cup Winners' Cup triumph, where they beat Karlsruhe Jena in the final. Mikha, you're of course too young for this one, as you mentioned, only 24 years old. Jacek, even you are too young for this one.
Even me, yeah.
But surely, I mean, as someone who worked in Tbilisi at Dinamo Tbilisi, and also, I mean, has grown up in Tbilisi, this must have been kind of the defining moment in the club's history that's also kind of passed down to you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, prior to Euro 2024, that was by far the biggest and the most important event that had happened in the history of Georgian football. That side was legendary because they had some standout players that were not only famous in Georgia, but in the whole, well, back then USSR. And they had very impressive performances. Even a couple of years before that, they beat Liverpool 3-0 here in Tbilisi, although I think they lost 2-1 at Anfield. It was the first leg, and then they won 3-0 here in Tbilisi, and they knocked Liverpool out. And then just a couple of years later, it was when they actually won the whole tournament. They beat West Ham in the quarterfinals. And I've heard from some of the older English fans that they were just basically shocked because they didn't even know who these guys were. Some small country somewhere in Eastern Europe, they don't even know like when they played last time or who is the player who's scoring against them, and they were basically shocked to see Dinamo Tbilisi, that the side was playing like amazing football. But yeah, I mean, after that we had a period where club football is not as developed, and I hope it changes in the near future. But with the breakdown of Soviet League after the USSR, the level of domestic football just decreased dramatically, and we actually never recovered from that.
I think that's a really, really interesting element. I think it's always very, very cool to see kind of for nations like Georgia, but a lot of them also kind of from the pre-Soviet bloc in general, from Eastern Europe, how important these tournaments were in the past, like the Cup Winners' Cup or in general just these international competitions. How these sides from countries that you couldn't scout in the past. It's not like today where you'll be working in a normal European Conference League fixture and go on Wisescout and have the team's fixtures for the last 2 years all in front of you, plus data packs and everything else, right? You really had hearsay and maybe some newspaper snippets that you could kind of look into, and then to see kind of a country from this region go on such a fascinating run is just a beautiful aspect of cup competition that I think we'll never see again in international matches or even in club football. Should we maybe just go into some of the defining figures of then Georgian football in the past? So maybe not a guy like Jacek Kulig, who's of course a defining figure of the present, but still kind of making his inroads in his career, but maybe some of the ones where Jacek, you grew up on, Mikha, you grew up on, and I think one of the first one that stands out is really Kaki Kaladze, one of the defining figures of modern Georgian football from his time at AC Milan, and even post his career, which I think, Mikha, you can get on a bit.
So Kaka Kaladze, nowadays, he doesn't have as good of a reputation as he had previously because, basically after he retired, he decided that he wanted to be a politician for some reason. I never understand why players, especially the ones who are so successful and who are loved by everyone in their country, decide to do something like that. I always think that that's the wrong move, but I mean, it is what it is. But yeah, I mean, he is by far the most successful football player that our country has ever had. He won 2 Champions League titles with the team that is one of the best in the history of football. I think nowadays we have, and I'm happy that we have at least 2 players in the national team who have the quality to replicate that result or even improve that, hopefully. And I hope to see that very soon in the near future. But yeah, I mean, he was in the best team even back then, especially then. That Milan team was absolutely amazing. And in that period, to have a Georgian player, and I emphasize on that because, as we mentioned, the country was not scouted as frequently and as actively. So to have a representative of your country in such an amazing team was just amazing.
If I can add mine, my thoughts about Georgian football, we asked Mikha what was his first memory of Georgian football. So my first memory of Georgian football was Georgia-Poland game in, I think, 1997, and Georgia beat Poland 3-0. And I still remember crying after that game, and I said, how come we lost to Georgia 3-0? But if you look at this team and these players in the 90s, for example, Kinkladze was at Manchester City. Okay, not the same city that we have now, but still Manchester City. So Demetradze, he played for example, Real Sociedad. There was this genius, bold Temur Ketsbaya playing for Newcastle. So it was a really, really nice generation of players. And you know what? There was a guy, I think Archie Berry, who wrote a guest article for me a few months ago about a Georgian player. And he wrote, this is the first golden generation in Georgian football. And I don't know, Mikha, if you agree with that, but I do not. I honestly do not, because I think that generation with Ketsbaya, Arveladze brothers, was the first golden generation of Georgian football. Okay, they didn't impress like the current one, but football was different back then, and they couldn't really qualify for a major tournament. It was very difficult. But man, these players were really quality players. So would you say that the current generation, okay, I use the word gold, maybe it's a big word, but let's say great generation. Would you say that it is really the second or the first one, the first golden generation of Georgian football?
Well, yeah, definitely. I totally agree 100%. And also another thing is that, as we all already said a few times, the times were different. Those players who played for the national team in the 90s still played for amazing teams. But I mean, if the time was different and if international scouting, video scouting, social media and everything was more developed back then those players would have played on an even higher level, I would say. Well, Arveladze and Galadze, they played in brilliant teams, but for example, other players could have played in much better teams. But as you mentioned, Kinkladze, he was probably the best player and the most talented player. However, he never actually reached. Well, he was actually not even remotely close to reaching his full potential. Yes, he was at Man City and he played in the Premier League, but he could have played for several seasons and he could have scored even more goals. And well, even nowadays, he's a standout player in the history of Man City, definitely. But he could have been even bigger if he didn't have those many injuries and everything. So, yeah, I totally agree with you that the generation that we have nowadays is not the first golden generation, although they are very good as well. But they're definitely not the first ones. I agree.
And I would just like to almost stay with Team Klatze for a second, because I mean, like Mika, I was not alive for King Klatze's really best times, but I think YouTube is obviously a great resource, and I'd kind of recommend to anyone to go on YouTube and look up some of his highlights, because for me, he's really kind of the defining player for modern Georgia, in the fact that he's really almost embodies really the skillful, silky, tricky winger, which we see Georgia just producing en masse. In my former job at Nordense, I was tasked with kind of helping one of our athletes who played in the Georgian in first division and second division. So I watched a lot of footage of kind of Georgian first division, second division matches, and even in second division football, which is really not a great level, you still see how much kind of individual quality you have in wide positions to kind of beat a man, to have the freedom and creativity to go 1v1 with your opponent. I almost think of Georgia a lot of times as like the South America of Europe, in a sense, because there's just so much kind of individual creativity that you really don't typically associate with anything in Europe, let alone Eastern Europe or a country that's a former member of the USSR. It's kind of like the polar opposite of what you see from a cultural context in Georgia.
Yeah, definitely. And you've touched upon a very good point, because I've also heard from a few international scouts that some people call Georgia the Brazil of Europe, which is a great compliment.
I didn't want to go that far. I stuck with South America to give a little bit of a leeway, but Brazil, maybe they need to qualify for a few more international tournaments, and then I'll go for
definitely.
Brazil.
Well, definitely. That's why I wanted to say that it's a great compliment. If you ask me, we're not as talented as Brazilians are, and I don't think that there is a nation on this planet that is remotely close to being as talented as they are. They are just on another level. They live in their own universe. They are just amazing. But it's definitely a great compliment, and I'll definitely take that. But yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why Georgian players develop this style of play, and why this is a common theme in Georgian wingers is very simple, and actually it's very similar to why Brazilians and South Americans play in that way, because Georgian players, when they are growing up, they actually play in the streets quite frequently. And if there's one thing that street football allows you to develop, is let's say the adaptation on the pitch, because when you play in the streets, you play on different surfaces. Sometimes you play on concrete that is not very smooth. Sometimes you play on I don't know, maybe on sand, on different surfaces that are not as smooth as the grass pitch. So what it allows you to do is to understand how the ball behaves in different scenarios, and how to control the ball in different cases, and what to do after that. Another thing that street football allows you to do is to develop faster decision making and your ability to play in tight spaces, because in most cases the street that you're playing, not only the street, but wherever you're playing, is not a very wide area. It might be most probably very narrow, so you have to keep the ball in those tight spaces, and you have to manipulate, you have to break this pressing traps and all this kind of stuff, which then helps you to be a quicker player on the pitch when you're playing already on a much wider pitch. So that's why you will see the similarities between probably South American players and Georgians. And that's why in many countries across Europe, local authorities, basically governments and everything, like they're trying to build small stadiums, like small pitches, not stadiums, small pitches where kids can play. And that's exactly where they develop the skills. Like in those small pitches, these kids are touching the ball more frequently than they would touch the ball in a 1 hour or a 90-minute training 3 times a week. So that's why this sort of things are very important.
I have an even better comparison, to be honest. I wouldn't
Yeah.
say it's the South America of, the Georgia is the South America of Europe. I would even say that it reminds me more of North Africa, so Morocco, Algeria. I'm quite sure that if you will go to the streets of Marrakesh, you will find 100 Davitashvilis there. So creative dribblers, great in tight spaces. So yeah, for me, it's more North Africa than South America.
Yeah, look, I mean, I even had a post about North Africa on Twitter. Like, that is my personal favorite region to scout. Like, they also have this flair that they can dribble and do these cool tricks, but they have something different. Like, you can recognize that their dribbling and their skills is a bit different from the South American flair. You know, one of my favorite players is Tarabt, the one who played for QPR. Absolutely amazing. Like, he's just incredible. So that's exactly what I love about this North African players.
I think it would be a great episode almost in itself to go through all the different dribbling characteristics and all the different technical qualities that define nations around the world. I think that will be someone that will maybe have Mikha on for again. But I think the factor that really is interesting is kind of this push towards small-sided football, because it's such a big element in Germany now that our culture is missing exactly what makes Georgia thrive. And I think what Georgia's missing is almost what Germany has, right? We have extremely well-coached children from a young age who know how to play in a 3-5-2 and a 4-3-3 and a 4-4-2 and know how to adapt to multiple positions. But when you kind of put them in unfamiliar situations, they can almost function like robots sometimes, where they don't know how to kind of make decisions for themselves. Versus in Georgia, you have kind of really players who have kind of the creative and self-autonomy to make their own decisions and come to solutions on their own. But then when it comes to things like, okay, how do we maybe manage a game in the 80th minute when we're winning 1-0? And how do we kind of, make smart decisions to kind of help the team succeed? That's where they maybe have some failures in certain regards.
Definitely. But one of the benefits of that is that this tactical understanding and game management and everything else is coachable. Like, you can actually develop that later on, whenever you want, actually. Not whenever you want, but even if you're 22, 23, 24, you can coach that. You can develop that. But this sort of creative things are established earlier on, like when you are, 11, 12, 13. That's when you should actually play football as frequently as possible, and in those small pitches, in those tight spaces, because that's exactly when you develop those skills that are not as easily coachable later on. And probably if you don't have it in your earlier years, you might not even be able to develop that later on.
I call it the on-the-ball bravery. So, for example, when I came to Belgium, I was 15 when I came to Belgium, and in Poland, I was considered a really solid center back that nobody could get past me. And I was feeling so strong. So I went to school, and we had our first gym class. And I played with mostly guys from the Moroccan origins, and they completely destroyed me. Like, really, after 1 hour, I was feeling like a loser. Like, what a hell. And I asked them, guys, where do you play? Like, Anderlecht and Anderlecht? And they said, no, man, we just play on the streets. And that's when I understood that, my football career is not going in the very good way.
So now that we kind of have a solid background on kind of some Georgian success in the past, some key figures, also a little bit of kind of the defining football elements that define a Georgian player, why don't we go a little bit more towards the future now? So, I mean, most people, of course, remember Georgia for the Euro 2024 qualification and also making it out of the group stage. But I think we need to go a little bit further back to first Euro 2020, where they literally came within 90 minutes of qualifying, losing 1-0 to North Macedonia. And then I think also a pretty seismic moment that probably wasn't on everyone's radar was the U21 Euros in 2023, where Georgia again not just made it out of the group stage, but they also hosted the event, which is a pretty big factor for a country of Georgia's size. And also, which Jacek mentioned, of course, in the beginning, which you mentioned as well, Mika, a country that for the longest time had empty stadiums and now suddenly kind of had a surge in football from these moments. So yeah, why don't we start with Euro 2020 qualifiers and then move to the U21 Euros?
Yeah, so in 2020, that was a massive heartbreak because we played the semi-final against Belarus. We won that game, and then we were playing the final against North Macedonia. Both games were in Tbilisi. But the biggest downside was that it was during the pandemic and the stadium was fully closed. And also another thing was that Mikha Gabacheva was injured, so he couldn't play that game. And that was exactly when he was developing the most, when people started to understand who he was and how important he would be for us. And we were missing this sort of a key player in that game, and we were also missing 55,000 fans, which was a huge thing. So we lost that game 1-0, and well, it was a massive heartbreak because, well, we were just half a step away from qualifying for the Euros for the first time in our history, and that didn't happen. But exactly like whatever I was saying just previously about our fighting spirit and everything, you could see exactly that a few years later, because we didn't only bounce back from that heartbreak and that defeat, but we had a massive, significant progress in all aspects. And you can see that it's not stopping, and I hope it doesn't, and I hope it continues like that. After that, we didn't only qualify for the Euros in Germany, but we also made it out from the group stages, which was absolutely incredible. Like a few years ago, people could only dream of just qualifying for the Euros. It was something that we were hoping to do, I don't know, maybe in the next 20 years. And all of a sudden, we qualified for that tournament, and we also managed to beat Portugal in the group, the team that was probably thinking of winning the tournament. And then, yeah, we unfortunately, we faced Spain in the round of 16, and we got knocked out. But whatever it was amazing. And as I said, it was by far the biggest achievement and the biggest event in the history of Georgian football. It definitely was bigger than the 1981 success of Dinamo. Even though they won the Cup Winners' Cup, this thing that happened with the Georgian national team, and especially because it was the national team of Georgia, made it even bigger.
Even for you and your personal experience, I mean, you were at one of the matches. So what was it like for you as kind of a traveling fan also with Georgia?
That was the most important game that I had to attend because it was against Portugal and we won that game. So, I mean, I went there just to enjoy, you know. I would be an idiot to think that we were going to win that game. Like, how would you think that? They had Cristiano Ronaldo after, you know, and he was playing probably his last ever tournament, and he wanted to win. And to see him so annoyed by the fact that we were winning against him made it even better, you know. So the atmosphere was amazing at the stadium. At some point, I thought that I was in Tbilisi because it was so loud. And I think the moment when we won that game was on the second minute when we scored, because you could see how devastated Portuguese players were and how they panicked actually, because they didn't expect us to start on the front foot, and they just panicked. And the one who panicked the most was the most important player, Ronaldo. He was just moaning every single second after that. And he was, the only thing that he was trying to do was to win a penalty. That was the only thing that he was trying to do for the whole, I don't know how many minutes he played, probably 70 or something like that, but the whole time he was just trying to win a penalty. But yeah, I mean, that was fantastic, a massive experience for our players who are most of them are still very young. So to have such an experience at such a young age is just incredible.
And I think we all remember this game. Adam and me, we were Georgians that day, and I still remember that every counter attack of Georgia was so incredibly dangerous. Like every time, every counter was so close, to finish in the net. So great game and a great day for Georgian football. And yeah, as you said, this team was so young, and there is so much future ahead of these guys. So we are waiting for more.
I remember me and Jacek, we did a lot of shows throughout the Euros. And when we did kind of a match day 1 preview, we asked what's going to be the most exciting game. And I remember, what did we have? There were so many big games. Croatia against Spain on match day 1. But both of us unanimously said Georgia versus Turkey. 2 amazing fan bases. I think that was the game in Dortmund as well, in the Signal Iduna Park.
Yeah, exactly. That was the one.
And 2 teams that just relish the opportunity to basically go forward, play exciting, attacking football. And yeah, I think that one lived up to its billing. Let's talk a little bit more about just talent development in general in Georgia. And obviously, I think the biggest one to start with here is Dinamo Tbilisi. And it's not just because Mikha is from Tbilisi and worked at Dinamo Tbilisi. It's not just because of that Dinamo was so good at developing talent. It's not just because they had such an eagle-eyed scout. But more generally, I mean, just the track record they have is kind of above and beyond anything else in Georgian football. Why do you think that Dinamo has kind of developed this real hub for being the talent producer in the country?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of people ask me that. And from what I've seen, honestly, I can tell you straight away that there is no secret recipe. They don't actually do something incredibly complicated that no one else in the world knows about. A great part of that success, let's say, of finding, recruiting, and developing these young players is heavily related to their success that they had in the 80s, actually. It is still by far the biggest club in Georgia, and it benefits from that big name, because you have to consider the fact that around 1/3 of the population in the country lives in Tbilisi, which is huge. Even though by European standards, Tbilisi is not a huge city, still the population relatively to the total population of the country is big. So whenever there's a parent who wants his kid to be a football player, they always take him to train at Dinamo, and because of that, Dinamo Tbilisi has the benefit of being the first one to accept or reject the player. They are the ones who decide whether to recruit that player or not. They are the first ones to decide that. But in very rare cases, when they actually, it's natural that they will not have a 100% track record. So sometimes they miss someone. And in those cases, those players then go to Saburtalo, another team in Tbilisi. Now they've changed the name. Their name is Iberia 1999. So that is the second best talent development place in Georgia, because let's say all the players that Dinamo misses, then they go to Saburtalo. Other clubs don't actually have great academies, and talent development is not, to be honest, it's not as developed as it is in, for example, Scandinavia and western part of Europe. That's exactly why I always say that our country has great potential, because even with such small resources and not developed talent development, we still manage to do something, and not only something, but we have great results on an international level in terms of the national team. So that's why I always say that we have great potential, because if we improve our scouting, that is basically non-existent, I would say. If we develop our recruitment as well as player development, Georgia can become a much better country, like as a footballing nation, than it is right now.
I think the statistic you mentioned right at the beginning, that Tbilisi is 1/3 of the population of Georgia, is really, it's a huge factor I didn't even consider. I just did some quick research myself just on my phone, and I looked at kind of Zagreb compared to Croatia, and Zagreb is less than 1/5 of the Croatian population. We're talking about, again, a huge talent hub in Croatia as well. And that's not even nearly what Tbilisi is for Georgian context. So yeah, a huge factor there. One big question then for me is then when we kind of expand away from Tbilisi, the Georgian top flight in general, the Eronuli League. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's probably not the first or the last thing we'll be pronouncing incorrectly in this episode. That's the Georgian top flight. From my experience scouting it, from Jacek and Mikha as well, I think that there's pretty big discrepancies in quality when watching kind of the football in the division, right? You'll watch kind of a Dinamo Tbilisi home match and then a Dinamo Tbilisi away match, and you think you're kind of going from top tier football to fifth tier away match in a cup competition. And I think that kind of gives an image of what the football can be like. But what do you think of the football in general, and then also more specifically as kind of a talent hub for Georgian talent, but maybe also for other regions like African players, for example, or those from Baltic markets as well?
Well, first of all, I have to be honest, the quality and the standard of the domestic league, Eronuli Liga, in Georgia is absolutely terrible. It must be much better to ensure long-term sustainability of our football. But nowadays it's absolutely terrible because there is a huge lack of investment in football. Well, quite recently, because of the under-21 Euros, there were 3 stadiums that were renovated, and that were Dinamo Tbilisi Stadium, Dinamo Batumi Stadium, as well as Torpedo Kutaisi Stadium. So these 3 stadiums got new pitches that are actually good, but the rest are absolutely terrible because simply they don't have enough finances to improve their infrastructure and everything. So because of that, they don't have enough resources to bring high quality foreigners, and all of the good young players, not all of them, but like 80% of the most talented players in the country are at Dinamo Tbilisi. So Dinamo Tbilisi has all these good young players, and the rest of the teams that are in the league don't have talented local players because, as I said, all of them are at Dinamo, and because of that, they cannot compensate by bringing good quality young foreign players because, first of all, they don't have the resources to do that. They don't have enough finances to give them decent salaries, and they don't even have scouting departments to actually search for players. The only way Georgian clubs recruit players is by random agent suggestions. Which might sound terrible, but it is what it is. That's how they recruit. Clubs work with some agents that have connections here and there, and that is why I cannot actually name more than a couple of decent foreigners that I've seen in the past 10 years in Georgia. And that is the main problem as to why the league is not as developed. Some people might think, then why is our national team as developed when our league is in such a terrible state? And the answer to that is, to some extent, we were lucky to have so many talented players in the same generation. Well, normally you don't get such an elite level talent as Khvicha Kvaratskhelia and Mamardashvili in the same generation, and because they left early on in their career, which is on one hand, for Georgian football, it's bad because you're losing very good players, young players early on. But at the same time, if they hadn't left early on, then they wouldn't have developed as they did nowadays. So that's the trade-off, you know. You also touched upon the topic about markets and recruitment, and I also mentioned that scouting in Georgia is non-existent. But the only club, I would say, who does a half-decent job at it is Dila Gori. So what they do is that they have a group of people who have good connections, especially in the African region, and because this year the Georgian Football Federation decided to increase the limit for non-Georgian players, they actually recruited significantly more African players than they would normally do. Now I think it's 14 or 15 players per team, non-Georgian players, while previously it was only 8 or 9. So it's a massive increase. So every now and then, Dila Gori, they, let's say, spawn a random player that hasn't played probably even professional football, and all of a sudden he's playing quite well in Georgia. So they had a similar case with Thierry Gale just a year ago when he signed for Rapid Vienna. And now they also have a few other interesting players that I believe we will be discussing in the second part of this podcast. But yeah, I mean, they do it quite well. I hope just a couple of other clubs did the same job that they are doing.
I think that Jacek, a lot of the themes he also mentioned about kind of the trade-off between wanting to develop homegrown and then also wanting to export early. They're also kind of themes that I think of when I think of Polish football. I don't know how your stance is to that, but it's another one where I think a lot of the top Polish players in the past were also those who were maybe developed in Germany, but possibly changing now with Polish academies becoming more professional. I think that's kind of the route where Georgia can also look towards.
Yeah, but it's still, I always say that Polish players, when they are 19 or 20, they already should leave Poland. The differences between even the training in the Bundesliga and Poland are huge, so they need to leave ASAP. And I have a quick question to Mika. You said about this monopoly of Dinamo Tbilisi. So I will give you an example. If there is an outstanding under 14 player in Torpedo Kutaisi, how easy is for Dinamo Tbilisi to get this player, to take this player to their academy?
It just takes one call to sign them at Dinamo Tbilisi. You just call their family, say that you're interested, and then they immediately sign for you, because it's that simple, actually. It's not complicated, because everyone knows that you have a fair chance to play, for the B team that plays in the second division of Georgia, that is quite decent. I mean, for example, when you're a 15, 16-year-old player, you know that if you're good, you will have the chance to play men's football, which is in the second division, although second division is not as good as the first division. But still, at least you're playing against professional players, like you're playing against grown-up men. And when you sign for Dinamo's Academy, when you play for Dinamo's Academy, you already have the hope, and you know that if you're good, you have the fair chance to play even in the first team, because there have been some players who made the jump from under 19s directly to the first team by skipping the B team. Some of them just played just a couple of games, just a few games for the B team, and then they immediately went to the first team. So they have the hope that, these parents have the hope that if their kid does well, he has a fair chance to play actually professional football. While with other teams, it's not the case. You won't see many teams promoting their young players to the B team or to the first team. So that is why it's very easy for Dinamo to convince parents, convince players to play for them.
Okay, I think we could see this similar thing in Montenegro, for example, and Budućnost Podgorica. I think it's
Exactly.
a very similar case.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, I think that wraps up part one, and then in part two we'll be back in just a moment going through some of the biggest talents in Georgian football, and then also some of the foreigners who are leaving their mark in the top flight. Okay, now that we've set the stage with a real understanding of Georgian culture, their football history, and kind of their modern talent development, let's get into some real future stars of the Georgian national team and some standout foreign players in the division. Each of us has chosen one U19, one U23 Georgian talent, as well as one U23 foreign talent playing in the Eronuli League. Mikha, seeing as you're our guest and Georgian football expert, let's start with your pick for the U19 Georgian talent.
Okay, so with this one, I actually chose probably a very unknown player, because he's actually 15. So for an under 19 player, I went for a 15-year-old kid who I believe is amazing. So I just wanted to tell you about him because I don't think a lot of people outside of Georgia, well, most people in Georgia who are not really that actively involved in football actually don't know about him as well, but especially outside of Georgia. So that's why I just wanted to tell you about this kid who is probably the next superstar, as big as Kvaratskhelia. Well, maybe this is a very bold statement saying about a 15-year-old kid, but I think he is very good because I've seen him with my own eyes. When I worked at Dinamo, I was doing coaching courses, UEFA C license and then B license. But when I was doing C license, I was coaching, I think I was coaching under 8 or under 9s. So, well, I had this training session with them, with these kids. And on the pitch just next to me was this 14-year-old kid. No, back then he was 13-year-old kid. So back then he was 13, and I think it was under 14s, and he was basically training with kids 1 year older than him. And but I didn't know that he was 1 year younger back then. It was first time seeing him, and he was basically playing so well that I asked the coach why he was playing a guy 1 year older than this kid. And he told me that this guy is not 1 year older, but he's actually 1 year younger than them. And I was actually amazed to see how confident he was on the ball, how sharp, how explosive, quick, and how creative he was. And that was the thing that made me keep a close eye on him, because when you see such a young player having such creativity on the pitch, it's always great to see. So since then I've kept my eyes on him.
Yeah, I just saw his YouTube highlight tapes before recording. It feels almost easy to say, oh yeah, Georgian winger, let's compare him to Jacek Kulig. But I mean, really, it's the comparison you'd make for a player like him. So good at drifting into central spaces, so technically gifted with both feet. I mean, he's really... running rings around defenders.
Exactly, like that's also another thing. He's two-footed, and he's using both feet at such a young age with ease. Like it's crazy. Like you don't actually see that too often.
Mito, when we talked about kind of the Georgian national team in 5 years, we talked about all these talented wingers. What are they going to play? A 3-4-3? Like how are you going to get them all on the pitch?
No, he's actually he sometimes plays on the wing, but I think he will be, in a few years' time, he will be a number 10, because he has fantastic, absolutely amazing playmaking skills. Like he sees everything on the pitch. He sometimes when I watch him, I think that he has like this 360 camera attached to him. I don't know how he does those things that he's doing. So that's why I think he will most probably play as a number 10, although as you mentioned, he can also play from the left wing, from the right wing, but I definitely see him as a number 10.
Jacek, have we found a player who wasn't even on your radar?
And the first thing I'm going to do is to watch him on Wisecout when I leave this podcast. So thank you guys.
Is he on Wisecout?
No, well, there's only one game on Wisecout available, and basically, well, sometimes there is a confusion because, well, his full name consists of two surnames. That is not typically Georgian thing. You only have one first name and one last name. Like there is no middle names and stuff like that. So his full name is Andrea Ekutice Bartishvili, but some people call him with one surname and some people call him with another surname. So that's where the confusion kicks in, you know. Some people call him Andrea Bartishvili, some people refer to him as Ekutice. So that's why there is some sort of a confusion in the Georgian football community because of that. And if you even sometimes on YouTube, sometimes I come across videos that are listed as Andrea Bartishvili, sometimes as Andrea Ekutice. And if you don't know that he has this two surnames, you might think that you're watching two different players. But when you watch, you will understand that this is one player because he's absolutely amazing. I mean, you should definitely watch. There must be a video of him playing against Valencia's under 14s. That was an international cup in Batumi just last year. And the goal that he scored against Valencia in the final, and Dinamo actually won that tournament without losing a single game. the goal that he scored over there, it just defines him in that 10 seconds. You will understand who he is.
Jacek,
Sure.
do you have a player, and is he younger than 15? Because that's kind of the big question.
No.
I think Mikha may win the youngest player on the show today.
Yeah. I will go with the mainstream player. Sorry, guys, but yeah, I will go with the Vakhtang Salia, another Dinamo Tbilisi duel. A guy who's 17, but he already played quite a lot in senior football. I think he scored 3 or 4 goals already for Dinamo Tbilisi. I see him. Well, he plays on the left wing. I see him more as a second striker in the future. In my report, I compared him to João Felix. Okay, he's not as technical and elegant as João Felix, but they kind of operate in the same zones. So I think it can be the next big sale of Dinamo Tbilisi, and I'm quite sure that very soon he will leave Georgia, and yeah, I just hope that he will go to a country like Belgium or Netherlands, or Austria, so one of these transition developing leagues. But yeah, definitely one of the guys that will be able to play in the national team in a few years.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Well, first of all, I'll quickly mention that I think he's already leaving Dinamo. 99% he's joining Newcastle United, but he will be joining Newcastle, I think, next year, because he's still 17, and he will basically remain on loan until he's 18. So that is going to be August of 2025, and he will then probably go on a couple of loans.
Yeah, okay. So it's not my dream move for him. Let's be honest. Like Premier League and then loans. Yeah, okay. It's not the greatest move, I would say. But yeah, I wish him all the best. And yeah, Georgia produced really good talents, but they can't really afford to lose talents like Salia. Let's be honest. So all the best in England. But as I said, I'm not the biggest fan of this move.
Okay, I'll round it off then for our U19 category, and no surprises here. I've also gone for a Dinamo Tbilisi player. It's not just because Mikha's here. It's like we said, it really is kind of the hub for talent in Georgia. And I've gone with Sabat Karabashvili. He's the youngest debutant in Dinamo Tbilisi history. He's just 16 years old, but made his debut as a 15-year-old this season. And he's really been one of the players who have, I would say, profited from some, difficult periods in Dinamo Tbilisi's history. I mean, it's a club who is a real dominant force in Georgia, 19-time Georgian champions who were kind of the premier team in Georgia and are now in 5th place at the time of recording and really nowhere near kind of staging a title threat this season. But that has opened a lot of opportunities for these real academy graduates to get early minutes. And I think he's kind of the embodiment of what's good to come out of this campaign. He's played 15 matches, started 12, so really kind of a key player now. And yeah, what I really like about him is, on the first hand, it's kind of his confidence that he has. I mean, it's really a tricky period to come in for such a historic club, playing such a poor season, and then to not just, play minutes and hide on the pitch, but really take a big role. I think in the last few matches, he's even been playing as kind of a DM who really wants the ball at all times, who's really comfortable on it. You see, I mean, this player who, when you kind of have the zoom out picture, when it's not kind of zoomed in on the player, you see kind of, this confident 22, 23-year-old, and then it kind of goes into the zoom in the replay and you really see, hey, this is a boy playing football right here. But you don't necessarily see that when you see his actions on the pitch. And I think the second thing I really like about him is his versatility. I mean, he plays as a left back, he plays as a DM, he plays as a right back, and then he also fluidly moves across these roles all the time. He'll play as a left back, play the ball into the center, and then move into the center also. That's why, for me, I mean, I think of Ian Matson right away when I see this player. He's definitely that type of mold. And yeah, I mean, has a really big future ahead. Obviously, he's not the finished package, right? I think sometimes he's still a little bit too conservative in his play, can still be a little bit lacking in orientation before receiving these types of themes. But for me, yeah, a really talented player and definitely one for clubs in Western Europe to keep a keen eye on.
Yeah, and I would say when we speak about a left back from Georgia, most people probably think, okay, so he's the Kvaratskhelia as a left back, right? He's just going forward every time, but it's not that. He's a really intelligent fullback. I would say even very close to a playmaking fullback if we use the roles. So really good passing skills, excellent prospect. Probably it's going to be the second big thing from Dinamo after Salia is sold.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that you mentioned, that people might start comparing him to Kvaratskhelia. But the thing is that he actually used to be a center back. A few years ago, when he was in the academy, he played as a center back. Then basically he is 183 or something like that. Basically not tall enough for a center back. So they eventually started playing him as a left back. And one of the things that stands out for me is that, well, first of all, on a technical level, I really like his crossing. He already has 2 assists this season, both from set pieces, and actually both against Dinamo Batumi, but in separate games. One was from a corner, while the other was from just a few days ago, I think, from a free kick. So he has very good crossing ability, which is not very frequent at such an age. And also, one of the things that is very impressive is his physical abilities, because Adam, as you mentioned, when you watch his game, if you don't know that he's 16, you wouldn't think that he's 16. First of all, as you mentioned, because of his actions, but also I would say because of his physical development, because you wouldn't see such a well-developed player at such a young age. At 15, he's already built like a grown-up man. The interesting thing about this is that when we speak about these young players and their development, one of the things that we mention all the time is late developers and early developers. So just to briefly say, early developers are the ones who are born in the first half of the year, and the late developers are the ones who are born in the second half of the year. And what you will see very frequently is that these early developers develop on a physical and as well as on a cognitive level very quickly and much earlier than the late developers. And this guy, he was born in August, so he should be a late developer, but all of a sudden he's developing on a cognitive and on a physical level much quicker than the early developers, which is incredible.
I think it's also a really important one to mention is, we all picked, this is a U19 category, and I think our oldest player was Jacek with 17, if I'm not mistaken. And I think it's really important to mention also the development that takes place between like 15 to 18. These are, for me, from a physical standpoint, but also from kind of like the football intelligence and maturity also offside the pitch that also influences their performances on the pitch. These are really, really critical and big years. So specifically to see players like Andrea Bartishvili and also Saba Karabashvili performing so well at such young ages, when you know that they're going to take big steps just in the next 1 to 2 years, really shows a lot of promise for the future. So yeah, all three are big names to watch out for. Now let's go a little bit up in the age categories, going to our U23 Georgian talent. Jacek, let's start with you this time.
Okay, so my pick is a guy who's actually 23, so kind of old. When you are 23 years old and you are still in Georgia, then okay, something is going wrong. But I still rate this guy quite high, and of course not as a top talent, but as a guy who could have a decent career in, let's say, Eredivisie. Maybe not in PSV or Ajax, but slightly lower. So my pick would be Alexandre Kalandadze, left-footed center back. Of course, we all know that clubs are crazy. When we get requests from clubs, they like 9 out of 10, they will tell you, yeah, we need a left-footed center back. So I think Kalandadze has really good qualities. He's decent on the ball, can also play as a left back, can play in a three-man line as a left-sided center back. So a very good profile, and I think it's the last moment for him to leave Georgia.
Yeah, it's a good pick. He's a decent player, I would say. He had a decent under-21 Euro campaign. He played well. He's quite quick, actually. I'm not sure if you can see that on Y-Scout, but when you see him in action live, he's actually quick. And also the fact that he's left-footed increases his chances of getting that move to Europe, because as you mentioned, this left-footed center backs nowadays are like bitcoins. It's a huge trend nowadays to recruit a left-footed center back. I know for a fact that last year he had a couple of options from clubs like Norway and Bulgaria. But I don't know why, actually, because I was not at Dinamo anymore back then, but he decided to stay and not to leave, which I think was not the right move. He should have left last year because it would have been the right time, exactly the right time, just after the Euros, to leave and to move to a better club in Europe. But he stayed, and as you mentioned, I think he must get that move next transfer window.
Okay, Mika, let's stay with you. You've also selected a really talented player, but one I would have never selected just because the name is impossible for me to pronounce. So I'll leave this one to you. He would have been off of my list, but tell me a little bit about him.
Yeah, so my pick is also a 23-year-old player, Giorgi Gocholeishvili. He currently plays for Copenhagen. And there are a lot of reasons why I like this player. But one of the reasons why I like this player is because of his versatility and because of the fact that he absolutely perfectly fits into the current setup of the national team. Because we play 5 at the back, 3-5-2. And I believe he is just perfectly suitable for that right wing back role. And when I say that he's versatile, I mean that he has probably played full right flank as well as on the left flank, as well as sometimes as a striker back in the days. So because of that, I think that such a versatile profile is always good to have in the team, not only in the national team, but also on the club level. And some of the things that I absolutely love about him is that he's actually very, very, very fast. He's very explosive. And since his move from Georgia, well, the first move that he had was at Shakhtar Donetsk. He went from Saburtalo to Shakhtar Donetsk. And in the first 6 months, he developed incredibly on a physical level. He was always lean and like weak guy, but all of a sudden in 6 months he became a muscular, like a monster. And when you take such a quick, fast, explosive player, and when you increase his muscle mass, then you basically give him superpowers. So it's always great to have such a quick and versatile player on the wing, especially when you're playing with a wing back. Also, one of the things that I like as well is his attacking potential, because he's always on the front foot. He has the confidence to drive forward, take the ball, and progress with dribbling. Even though he has some room for improvement on the defensive side, I think he still has the potential to become much better. And I believe he's in a very good position to become the first choice right back for the national team.
Yeah, I think Gocholeishvili is a really good example of what Jacek was mentioning earlier, how important it is for Georgian talents to also move quite early in their senior careers. I mean, I think, if I'm not getting it wrong, he left just a few months after turning 21 years old to go to Shakhtar, and I think all of his moves since then have made a lot of sense, going from Shakhtar to Copenhagen as well, another really good development hub. So yeah, it's just a great example of kind of the steps a player from a market like Georgia can take to make sure that they're getting the minutes at a high level, but still developing at the same time.
And by the way, he will have a serious rival for this right-sided center-back spot, because there is my guy, a guy who I made a report on many years ago because I absolutely loved him in Georgia, and he's absolutely exceeding my expectations right now in Empoli. So Saba Goglichidze. So a guy, when I saw him for the first time, technically perfect, so incredibly elegant, versatile. I wasn't expecting him to be starting for Empoli, and he starts and he does a great job. It's really a luxury to have two still young, well, Goglichidze is 20, Gocholeishvili is slightly older, but yeah, it's such a luxury. I think even in Poland, we don't have that luxury in defense.
Yeah, I mean, Goglic is a fantastic player as well. But the thing is that I think they can play together. I don't think that they might be competitors, because in a 3-5-2, Goglic can play as a right center back, for example, or maybe the centralmost center back, because with our center backs becoming older, he can definitely replace them. So he can play as a center back, and Gocholeishvili, who's definitely a right wing back and not a center back, can play on the wing. So that's great.
Then I'll round us off for the U23s with the youngest one in the group. I'm going to go with Otar Mamadaishvili. He's not a center back. He's a center midfielder. I think what's kind of interesting about him is I would initially look him up on Transfermarkt, as there you'll see kind of a bald player who has a specific type of look, and then when you actually watch him on Y-Scout or any recent footage, you'll see kind of this guy with a tiger's mane, long flowing hair, looking like some Greek god. I had to double check that they didn't tag the wrong player by accident, but it definitely was him. And yeah, he's a really, really interesting player. I would say kind of that real combative, high energy, bots-to-bots midfielder, super mobile, can make runs in behind, make late runs into the penalty area, but can also kind of be your supporting player in build-up phases. For me, best in kind of a high transition game, like a bots-to-bots game, almost like kind of like a basketball style game where it's really end-to-end, where he has a lot of moments to carry possession, to kind of play a lot of progressive passes, which he's quite good at. He's not someone who's going to kind of retain the ball in all modes of the game. He's not someone who looks for kind of the simple pass at all moments, but he's someone who likes to be really creative from deeper positions. And I think he's going to be someone who can maybe not go to the elite level, but definitely a smart pickup for a lot of clubs from maybe like a league like Hungary, for example, or a league like Romania.
He also has a twin brother, so Otar and Gizo, and I remember watching them both for Georgian national team, and they said, okay, I need to do a report on one of them. But I like both of them like the same way, and I just chose Gizo, and I made a report on Gizo, and it seems that Otar is having a better time. So, but yeah, definitely two interesting talents. And I remember that watching Gizo at Y-Scout, one of the first games, they tagged the wrong player and they tagged his brother. So
Yeah.
So
That's exactly
yeah.
what I wanted to say, actually, because like a few years ago they actually played, both of them played in the midfield. So, but now Gizo is playing on the wing sometimes. So when they played in the midfield, they used to have exactly the same haircut. So sometimes they would have this buzz cut and a mustache. So both of them exactly. So they played in the midfield. So it was impossible for you to understand which was playing in the midfield or on the wing. So that was incredibly difficult to understand, to differentiate between those two.
It reminds me of the Bender brothers in Germany. Remember them? They're both they both look exactly the same. Both play the exact same style of football. I don't even think anybody even knows which one played for which club. It's kind of how far it goes. But why don't we move on then to our final selection, the U23 Foreign Talents. And like Mikha mentioned, foreign talents are a little bit difficult in Georgia. Not a lot of clubs have been super smart recruiting there in the past, but there are a few exceptions. Dila Gori, which will feature in this selection as well, is one of them. But Mikha, let's start with your player.
Yeah, so I don't think we have a lot of options to go for, and that is unfortunate. But I think the players that we will be discussing are definitely the standout under 23 foreigners. So I'll go for Dila Gori center back Kali. So that's his name. He doesn't have a surname or whatever, or at least I couldn't find anything. So Kali, he is a center back who basically is from Angola, and he started playing just this season. So before that, there is no track record of him playing at the professional level. And basically, he was the surprise package because no one expected him to step up immediately and perform at such a good level. But all of a sudden, he's playing with so much confidence, with so much courage and character that he basically amazed everyone. What I like about him is that he's good on and off the ball. So in terms of in possession, he's capable of playing for a team that is basically possession-based because he's quite confident, can play line-breaking passes, can actually carry the ball forward when he's being pressured. So that's great to see that he has enough courage to accelerate and go forward. But also when he's off the ball and when he's defending, he's quite aggressive. Well, sometimes too aggressive. So he has to improve that and balance his emotions throughout the game. But he's definitely a good defender. And because he has a very good physical presence, he's strong, he's quick. He's actually very quick. So because because of that, he can play in a high line, because when there's a ball going in behind the defensive line, he can quickly turn. He has a good mobility, so he can quickly turn and track back in case he needs to. So because of that, I think he's a very interesting player to keep an eye on. He's 20 years old, so he's still quite young. So definitely one to watch.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting elements also with him is who his coaches. I mean, he has a coach, Ricardo Costa, who on the one hand is Portuguese, so there's also the language aspect there, which is really, really crucial for a player coming from Africa to, Georgia, which is an entirely different world to Angola. So to have a coach there who speaks your languages is super. And then also just looking at Ricardo Costa's background, I mean, he came from the Porto U17 team, he came from the Porto U19 team, so he's definitely a guy who knows how to deal with young talents, who knows how to develop players. So I think that's a really smart selection from Dila Gori as well, to kind of align having a manager who knows how to work with young players and kind of has that universal mindset with then a transfer strategy who also supports these players. Jacek, who have you gone for?
Maybe doesn't know, but I'm a sentimental guy. So I went with a player that I used to know a few years back, and a player who was in already two top academies. So he was first in Wafa Academy, so a very well-known African academy, and then he went to Salzburg. His name is Daniel Owusu. I'm going to shock you guys. I'm not that big of a Georgian watcher, so I don't really know how he plays right now, but I always say that talent will defend itself one day. And I think after being in Salzburg, that made the final of the UEFA Youth League. So he was playing alongside Roko Simic. He was playing alongside Umar Diakite, who's at Rams right now. So really, really good backgrounds. And I saw that he scored 4 goals for Samtredia. And I was quite shocked that transferring from Salzburg to Samtredia, well, it was quite weird, probably agents' work. But I still hope, well, obviously he's not a top talent, but I still see him playing in a better, with all due respect to Georgian league, in a better league, probably in the Eastern Europe somewhere. So maybe even Poland one day.
Yeah, I mean, he's only 21, and I mean, none of us have unfortunately seen him much this season, but FC Samtredia in general, Mikha, maybe you can give a few words on what that club is, and if that's maybe even a good spot for a player like him.
Well, I cannot talk. That's not the best club in Georgia. They are a lower level club. I think they currently sit 9th or 8th in the league out of 10 teams, actually. So not the best team, not the best stadium. Actually, one of the worst stadiums in Georgia. Like, I absolutely hate it. There are not many stadiums in the world that I hate, but the pitch over there is far worse than the rugby pitch. So I absolutely hate it. And when I was at Dinamo, we always struggled to play against them because they had a pitch that was basically, as I said, far worse than the rugby pitch, and the ball wouldn't even roll like smoothly for 3 meters. So I absolutely hate it. But yeah, I mean, going back to the player, one of the reasons why he's performing well in Georgia is that because he's physically well developed, he's quite quick, quite strong, and sometimes all it takes to play well in Georgia is to be quick and strong, because I've seen a lot of players over the past few years who have been performing well in Georgia purely because of their physical abilities, because as I said, the quality of the league is not good, and one of the reasons why the quality is not good is because the players are not physically well developed. They cannot run as fast, they are not as strong, they cannot run that much actually. So when you are a player who's fast, who's strong, you can definitely just outplay defenders just purely because of your physical abilities.
Yeah, and can you guys imagine Daniel Owusu coming from RB Salzburg? So one of the greatest academies in the world and great facilities, pitches, when you can literally eat from the pitch, and then he comes to Samtredia and he sees all this. Well, it was probably a big track for him, huge track for him.
Well, it must have been a cultural shock to move from Salzburg to Samtredia. you don't even have to Google that up. You don't have to find pictures of how Samtredia looks like.
Yeah, well, I think if the football talent show ever goes on tour, I think Samtredia may not invite us to their stadium after this endorsement. Maybe we go to a different Georgian club. But I'll round us off with, I would say, probably the most high-profile foreign talent this season. I would say has been Tayrell Wouter, a really, really interesting Dutch player. Came through the Twente Academy, so a really, really high-level academy in Dutch football, and then went to Volendam. Never managed to play any minutes in the first team, but in the third tier, played with the reserves and had some pretty good numbers. Then a very weird 6-month spell with BE1 National Football Academy in Lithuania. So, I mean, if you can imagine football worse than Georgia, there is, in fact, football worse than Georgia, and it's in Lithuania. But he played pretty well there, and then FC Dila came in the summer. And at FC Dila, he's absolutely exploded. 13 goals, 5 assists in 25 games. Only 2 players have added more goal contributions this season. And he's just a really, really effective, explosive winger. I mean, like Mita said, players with physical attributes thrive in this league. And I think what makes him so special is that he's able to kind of combine the raw, natural physical qualities with also kind of that technical Twente background, Dutch football, that really high-level Western European football background. I mean, it makes him a really, really impressive player. He's very comfortable on both feet also, which is such a good trait to have as a winger. It makes him kind of a good goal-scoring threat when he can cut in, but also kind of a creative one when he gets to the byline often to make really impactful cutbacks. He's also a set-piece deliverer, so he gets a lot of assists from corner kicks and indirect free kicks as well. So yeah, for me, definitely an interesting player. I would say for clubs in Romania, Hungary, Czech Republic, kind of these outskirts of Western Europe where they have some top teams and also some moderate teams, for kind of a team in those leagues looking to qualify for the Europa League or qualify for the Conference League, I think he'd be a really interesting asset, especially given that, of course, the Georgian calendar runs from across the summer and then ends before the winter. So in the January transfer window, he's a really interesting player you can pick up.
Certainly one of the most interesting foreigners in the league, and when he started playing this season, everyone was saying that all of a sudden Dila Gori respawned Tayrell that they sold to Rapid Wien just last year. And to be honest, the resemblance is striking. Like he's very similar to Tayrell, even with his body frame. He's very similar. If there's one thing that both players have in common is their speed and explosiveness. And yeah, exactly as you mentioned, some of the things that he is doing in the league is purely because of his physical abilities. For example, you will see that he has scored quite a few goals when forcing turnovers. So, for example, he's pressing high, and because he's so quick, he's intercepting those passes from center backs, even sometimes from goalkeepers. So that's how he has scored quite a few goals. And also with the runs behind defensive line, because physically, most of the defenders are not capable of keeping up with him. They're not as mobile to quickly turn and drop back. And over longer distances, if you give him space, you're just dead because he's lightning fast.
I think that rounds it up then. We've gone through pretty much everything you could ever hope for in Georgian football, I think. Every single figure, every single team, all the major factors in talent development have been touched on. So a big thank you to Mikha. It was a real pleasure having you on as our very first guest. We'll definitely be having you on again, not just for Georgian football, but some other factors as well, because yeah, you don't become a scout of a top club in Belgium by only having to focus on Georgian football. I can tell you that.
Thank you very much, guys. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Mikha, and I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as we did.